Hi everyone, I'm back from seeing The Conjuring, Last Rites with Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga as a now middle-aged pair of exorcists, doing a slightly beige version of what they were doing 12 years ago when they first started the franchise. I will say I quite enjoyed this film. I think when you're going to wrap up a big franchise like this, perhaps inevitably you fall into a kind of, I don't know, slight self-importance maybe. I think the film took itself rather too seriously. It's always been a slight problem with the franchise that doesn't have the sense of humor that some of the other horror franchises have. And it doesn't kind of by the time you get halfway through one of these films, you feel a bit like you're drowning in sepia. It has this kind of hangover from the Victorian period quality. It's really a very heavy, brocadey kind of ghost story. And this is very much in that category because I think what they do well is the production design and the costume design. Everything is 1980s when it's set. It reminds me of those very British 1930s detective shows like Poirot, where because it's set in the 1930s, nobody's allowed to live in, drive, or wear anything that wasn't built in the 1930s. And you're like, you do understand that even in the 1930s, there were still decades before that. And this kind of feels a little bit like that. It's sort of like everything is overdetermined. There's so much period detail. I do like what they do with the phone cord. At one point, there's some action around someone who's on a phone and walks away from the wall and then is kind of pulled back to it. And you think, yeah, phone cords were such a big part of the 19th. Anyone who remembers that era knows that those twirly little bits of plastic are like defining memories of what was different then from now. But I suppose it sort of feels a bit like the events of the story could happen at any point from 1600 to now, but the production designers doing all the heavy lifting to suggest that this is a distinctive film. And I'm not entirely sure that it is. Maybe the 80s setting gives it something, but it's not clear to me what. The only other way in which the material setting of the 80s starts to matter is that there's a brief use of VHS. But honestly, compared to other films in the footage genre, like there's absolutely nothing interesting happening around that at all. I think what it shows us is this is a franchise and this is a film which has always been about two things. Number one is time and death, and the other is the opposite, immortality and eternity. And there's one really good scene in the middle of this where a character has got dressed up in a wedding dress. She's in a shop buying a wedding dress, and she's surrounded by mirrors. And at one point she says to the missing helper who's somehow left the room, I'm starting to feel a bit claustrophobic. And I was like, yeah, I get you. I hear you. I'm starting to feel a bit claustrophobic as well. Everything's too thick, everything's too textured, and there's not enough forward movement. But maybe that's because these films have always been about everything coming back over and over again, and they've done it themselves. The return of the dead every few years. It's like there's nothing new or alive in this franchise, but it's going to keep popping back like a weird grinning doll. All that said, there are a lot of scares, there are a lot of really good moments. The woman next to me in the cinema screamed at one point, and I think I did at one point. So it's kind of serving up the old horror recipe. And if you want another serving of it, go see. If, on the other hand, you've got a bit bored of it, I promise you that by 2.5 hours of weirdly undercooked mythology, you will be even more bored.